So you want to be the very best, like no one ever was. Well, you're in the right place. Pull up a chair. Devs, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Derick. I'm a front-end developer based out of Los Angeles, California. And in today's video, we're going to be going over the best way to fetch data from an API endpoint using JavaScript. We're going to be using three methods in tandem with one another. First and foremost, we're going to be using the fetch API, which is a method baked into JavaScript. We're going to be using that with async await, and then we're going to wrap everything inside of a try-catch block. The API we're using is going to be the Pokemon API, and we're going to fetch all 151 of the original Pokemon. So go ahead and turn your hats backwards because we're heading to the JavaScript gym right now. So let's hop into our editor. All right, so we got our editor here and we've got our web view here on the right. And I'll briefly go over that HTML. It's just a very simple HTML template. We got a heading and we've got an unordered list, which is where those Pokemon are going to live once we fetch them. And then we'll be displaying them here in the body. We link to some CSS, which is just kind of setting the page up. And we're also linking to our script, which is this guy here, empty script. Great place to start. Let's go. So first up, just as an example, this is the URL that we're going to be going to hit, and that's going to give us our Pokemon. So let's actually go to this URL and take a look at the data structure that it's going to give us back. So this is the data that lives at that API endpoint, and we've got this results key, and we're going to open that up, and you can see we have all 151 of the original Pokemon. So our data structure is an object. We have the key results, which is an array of objects, and each object is a Pokemon. Let's go back to our editor. So when we fetch the data, I want to inject everything into this unordered list here that has the ID of Pokemon. So in our JavaScript, let's just create a reference to that element. We'll give ourselves some comments here, vars, and there's the reference to our container. We're just going to call it Pokemon container. And of course, the data is an array of objects. So let's just go ahead and initialize an array called Pokemon, which is just going to be an empty array for the time being. That's where everything's going to live. So now let's fetch the data and display it on the page. So when you want to do anything in JavaScript, what do we need? Well, a function. So let's just give ourselves a function skeleton here. We'll call it fetch Pokemon. And just for now, let's just log something to the console and we'll just say init fetch Pokemon. Now let's invoke that function real quick just to make sure it's working, and we're all good. We get our string in the console here. Now let's take our endpoint URL and store that in a variable. We'll just call this const URI, which stands for Uniform Resource Indicator. It's just a fancy way of saying URL. Now it will equal our string as a URL. Now here comes the first piece. We're going to fetch the data that lives at that URL, which lives inside of URI. So fetch is a method, and we simply just pass it the endpoint that we want to fetch data from, which is going to be URI. We'll make this live in a variable called response. And then we're going to bring in our second piece for fetching this data, and that is using async await. Now to use async await, we just drop the async keyword before our function declaration. That's the parentheses right here. And then the await keyword right before our fetch. When that data is fetched and stored in response, we'll then take that response down here, JSONify it. That data will then be converted to JSON, and then we'll just store that in a variable called data. Since this is asynchronous, we need the await keyword here as well. And now we can log data to the console, and let's just see what we get. And we got something here. Let's open this up, and we've got, okay, results 151. There is all 151 of our Pokemon. This is technically working, but remember, our Pokemon live in this results key here. So we need to tap down into that. We need to chain down into that, and then we'll have all 151 of our Pokemon, and we want that to live in our globally initialized variable Pokemon up here, which is, for now, it's just set to that empty array, so it's not doing anything. So data is where everything currently lives. So we'll take data. Remember, we're going to chain down into the results key here, and we do that with bracket notation, and then we just say results. We'll then take this and assign it or reassign it to our global variable Pokemon here, which we initialized at the top. This is a global variable, so we don't need the let keyword. So Pokemon, and give it that assignment. So it's now been reassigned to Pokemon, and then let's just log that to the console and see what we get. And there it is, all 150 of our Pokemon. Perfect. So now I actually want to bring in our third piece, which is our try-catch block. So we're going to wrap this in a try-catch block just for a little bit better, more graceful error handling. It's kind of like a safety blanket. It's just like an extra layer of security for us to handle an error if there is one. So I'll just grab these lines here. Let's get our try-catch block going. And then we want to try this first and it tries, along with async await, return a promise. But for whatever reason, if that promise fails, we can catch an error and then handle it more gracefully on our end. So if an error should occur, let's just log something to the console. We'll say failed to fetch Pokemon, sad face, and then pass in that error as well. So to give us a nice little message and then what the actual error is. And in our catch, we'll handle a little bit more here. We'll just grab our Pokemon container, set its inner HTML. We'll give ourselves another little message here. And since that container is an unordered list, we'll just spit out a list item here that says failed to load. And then if an error should occur in this catch, we want everything to stop right here in our script. We don't want it to go any further. So we'll just stop everything there with a return. So now let's see if this all works in our try catch. So far it is. We can see in our console here all the Pokemon. But let's say something is up with the endpoint. Let's mess this domain up. Let's throw an X in there. This obviously doesn't exist. So we get our failed to load message visually here in the DOM. Since we're injecting it here, we get our console log, which we see down here, and the actual error that comes baked in with try catch. And it just gives us some error message here down in the console. It says failed to catch with a bunch of other information. You can poke around in here, but just going to give you some more details about what the error actually is. So good. Let's get rid of the X. So this is good. So now let's get our data, our Pokemon, onto the page. So right below our try catch, we'll just initialize a variable called template. Template's just going to equal an empty string for now. But now that we have access to Pokemon, all the data, all the Pokemon actually live in that variable. Let's take Pokemon down here. Let's loop over it with a for each. And for each what do we want to call this? Well, let's just call it Pokemon character. So for each Pokemon character, do something. Let's take our template, bring that guy down here, and then we're gonna tack onto that template. We're gonna add on to it some basic HTML, and we're gonna put that all inside of backticks because we're gonna use a template literal here. So if we go back to our data structure, let's look at what we're dealing with. Each Pokemon is an object and it has the key value pair name and then the name of the Pokemon. So back to our code and we can just tap into the name. Pokemon character what? Back to our data structure, Pokemon character dot name. That's the piece of data, that's the piece of information in that object we're going to tap into. That's all going to live inside of template, but we can't see that yet unless we inject that onto the page. So we'll get our reference to our Pokemon container, take that down here, and set its inner HTML to the template. And there we have it, all 151 of our original Pokemon. So that's about it. So we could actually clean this up a little bit. I want to get these numbered just to know how many there are. And remember, with the for each array method, we can also tap into the index. We have access to the index. So I can add that here as a parameter, and then we come down to our little template. We'll do another template literal and we'll just say index, and then that will append a numbered index to each item. But we're in a programming language, right? JavaScript starts at indexes of 0. We know Bulbasaur is not 0, Bulbasaur is number 1. So to fix that, we can just come back to index and we can do +1, and then that will start us at 1 as we want, as we intend. So here's all 151, looks good, okay, and that's really about it. So that's it for this one, devs. If you found this helpful, definitely leave a like. If you've ever got to fetch data in your application, this, in my opinion, is the best way to do it. We're using the 3 methods in tandem with one another, and this basically just introduces the most secure and graceful way to handle things. But that's it for this one. Subscribe if you want to support the channel, but otherwise I will catch you in the next one. Take care.